Overtime!
This is my Atari Tempest Cabaret cabinet, and Tempest is another one of my all-time favorite arcade games. Now, just like with Robotron and Donkey Kong before, I restored this Tempest Cabaret long before I had a YouTube channel, but I do have some photos and videos that I can share kind of as a retrospective to sort of, go over what I went through with this project. And let me tell you, it was quite a project. And since Tempest was the game of the week recently for the weekly tournament that we run on the Overtime Arcade private members-only Discord, I figured this would be a great opportunity to record some gameplay footage, try to get a new high score, and, share some experiences from this project. Now, this particular cabinet is far from perfect, and, maybe if I didn't point out the flaws, you might not see them right here in this video, but we'll go through all of them in this episode, and we'll sort of talk about why things are the way they are and why I made the choices they did. Again, this was very early in my experience in this hobby, and, if I had to do it all over again, I would have done some things differently. And this is also a very challenging, notoriously challenging game to work on. Tempest was Atari's first ever color vector game, so a lot of this technology was sort of new and unproven, and it's, got a reputation for being quite challenging. And certainly at the time, it was by far the biggest and most serious restoration project that I personally hadn't taken upon myself. So anyway, I knew for a while that I wanted to get a Tempest, and, they're not that easy to come by. Atari made a ton of them, but people really like them, and a lot of them were destroyed or converted or whatever, and eventually I was able to find one from a local seller, from somebody I had bought games from before. I got this from DJ DNS, very well known on Clov. I had bought my Centipede from him before and lots of other parts and stuff. Now, DJ DNS used to live locally to me about an hour away before he moved down to Georgia, and as part of, I guess, getting ready to move, he was, emptying a bunch of storage units. And this is the picture he sent me when I told him I was looking for a Tempest. And as you can see, he had some really, really awesome games there in his storage unit. And although this Tempest Cabaret cabinet that I picked up was complete, it was absolutely a project and absolutely a non-working project. It was complete. It had everything, cabinet, monitor, game PCB, power supply, etc. But none of it worked. Everything needed to be repaired. Everything needed to be fixed, including the cabinet itself. Now, you might not be able to see from this photo, but this cabinet had really seen some water and had pretty significant water damage. And, I was a little bit intimidated to take on this project, but I figured this was a great deal on a Tempest, and the Cabaret is a great version, so I dove in head first. Like I said, the cabinet had water damage, the transformer needed attention, the PCB wasn't working, the monitor was completely dead. But anyway, I said, I'm going to learn something here, so let's go ahead and let's do it. I was able to salvage the lower back panel of the cabinet with lots of wood hardener. It still wound up looking pretty rough, but I was able to live with it, especially because it was on the back of the cabinet. I was hoping to be able to do the same with the sides, but eventually realized that they were just too far gone, as the particle board was literally coming apart in my hands with the slightest touch. So I ended up cutting off the bottom 6 inches of both sides and eventually replacing it with new material. If I had to do this all over again, I probably would have had a saw guide and kind of done it a bit more cleanly, but whatever, you live and you learn. In the new material that I built up, I kind of tried to match the thickness of the existing side panels by taking a piece of particle board and gluing it in between 2 sheets of brown masonite. So appearance-wise, as you can see, it certainly doesn't match the original wood grain vinyl, which, by the way, I've never heard, I don't think anyone has ever found a good modern match for the original Atari Cabaret wood grain vinyl. There just isn't somewhere out there that you can just order from 3M or whatever and get a good match. And while I'm certainly not going to claim that this brown masonite is a match for the wood grain either, it doesn't look that bad, especially in a dark arcade, a dimly lit arcade in the middle of a row. No one's ever come over and visit and mentioned it or pointed it out. So, the front of the cabinet was surprisingly, really fine, just a little cleanup. But yeah, I had to cut off the sides, or cut off the bottom 6 inches of both sides, replace it with new material, and the bottom had to be replaced entirely. I had the original bottom, which basically just fell right off to match from, so I kind of cut new pieces, cut new piece of plywood and new blocking, and kind of matched it up exactly right. And again, I don't think it looks too bad. It's nice and sturdy. Again, I'm not an expert woodworker, and this was also, again, like I said, very early in my journey in this restoration hobby. And rather than doing something which would have been better, like using doweling or a biscuit joiner or something like that, I used these like metal hurricane straps to reinforce gluing these panels together. I know, I stapled it too, right? And it's certainly not perfect, and it looks terrible on the inside, but on the outside, it's passable. The cabinet is nice and sturdy, and it hasn't given me any problems. Again, especially in a dimly lit arcade, in a home setting, in a lineup. You never even notice it, right? Next up, the transformer assembly turned out to be not that bad. I cleaned it thoroughly, I installed new fuses, I replaced the power cord, and it tested fine. I guess it already had a newer Big Blue that I'm assuming had been replaced by a previous owner, probably after the original water damage. But maybe, they were gonna eventually do a complete restoration, but never did. So all that tested okay. I did need to replace the Molex connector on the side of the transformer assembly where the power cord plugs in, as the plastic tabs that held the original one on were just broken. So with that, with everything pretty much disconnected, I plugged in the harness, turned on the power, and hey, I was treated to my first signs of life, a lit marquee, and in a dark garage. That looked really good and was, really inspiring, and kind of lulled me into a false sense of hope, given the challenges I was about to encounter. So next I moved on to the AR2 sort of power supply and audio amplifier board, and that really kind of tested out just fine from the get-go. Now, I will point out that right here, the 2N3055 bottle cap transistor, the power transistor on the big heatsink on the AR2, if you look closely here at the date stamp, it says 8138, which means that it was manufactured in the 38th week of 1981. So this is almost guaranteed to be the original 2N3055 transistor. And whenever you see an original date like that, you want to replace these things. They can fail catastrophically, cause some bad things to happen in your cabinet. So a good rule of thumb is whenever you see an original 2N3055, go ahead and replace it. Make sure you get it from a reliable source, because there are fakes out there. But that was really all I needed to do to the AR2. And then I turned my attention to the game PCB. Now, at the time, I had never worked on a game board before in any meaningful way, and even now, I don't do a ton of really in-depth stuff with repairing game PCBs. But I was hoping for some luck, although that did not turn out to be the case here. So I did a couple of basic initial steps, like reflowing the header pins and replacing some obviously broken pots in the vector section. I then plugged everything up and put it into test mode, and I wasn't getting the proper sounds in test mode, and I couldn't start a game. But so, the results that I got from test mode suggested that maybe the pokies were bad, very important chips on Atari game PCBs. So I replaced the pokies, and hey, I got it playing blind, right? So that's great. Maybe my luck is turning around. So I went through this really, really excellent guide created by Andrew B. Enclave called the How to Bring Up a 6100 Color Vector Monitor. And actually, a lot of this guide focuses on the game PCB and making sure it's putting out the correct voltages. So with a vector game, there's a very close interdependency, deep interdependency between the game PCB and the monitor. You have to make sure the X and Y output voltages are correct, because the game PCB can actually damage the monitor if the voltages are bad, and it's often very confusing. Things that you might think are a monitor problem are actually a board problem. Things that you might think are a board problem are actually a monitor problem. So, good rule of thumb, follow this guide religiously. It highlights the importance of testing your X out and Y out voltages before connecting the game board to make sure that you don't inadvertently damage it. Unfortunately, in my case, my voltages were way off, particularly the Y out voltage. I spent several weeks stuck on the vector section of this PCB, replacing ICs and pots and resistors, and nothing seemed to be helping. I was stumped. There was a ton that I did. One thing I really noticed that was pressing on the board in the vicinity of C13 and D/E13 caused the Y out voltages to start fluctuating in attract mode. So, I don't know, maybe bad sockets or cold solder or whatever. I did a ton of stuff here. I socketed and replaced C13 and D/E13. I replaced the Y center pot, the Y linearity pot, no change with that. I discovered R154 had a broken leg, so I replaced that with a new resistor. Again, all the voltages are still, they're fluctuating. I can tell that it's trying to do something during attract mode, but they were way out of range. I reseated all the socketed ICs. I actually broke a leg off a ROM in the process, but repaired that. I discovered that the X linearity pot had a broken leg and replaced that with a new one, and realized the Y linearity pot had been previously replaced, I guess by me, with the wrong value. I recapped the main PCB, which was probably unnecessary. And again, I was stumped and really frustrated and not having a good time, that's for sure. So I put it down for a couple of months. I took a break from the project and then came back. I was determined to figure it out, or at least go down fighting. I double-checked all of my previous work, corrected some more errors I had made earlier, tested it all again, but still no dice. I finally made a very, very lengthy post on Clov, in the Clov forums, laying out all the work I had done before and everything I was seeing, with the hopes that somebody would be able to point me in the right direction. Fortunately, both Andrew B. and also another forum member, Vector Collector, encouraged me to focus my attention on the XY pots in the vector section, even though I had already spent some time on all of them and replaced a few suspicious ones. And so I did a ton more work here. I replaced voltage regulators 1 and 3. I noticed a broken leg on the original X size pot. I noticed all the pads were missing for the Y center pot. I accidentally lifted a trace between the Y center pot and a resistor when removing the original pot. I went back and replaced all 8 pots in the vector section. I installed a jumper wire to replace the lifted trace. I noticed the middle leg of one of the newly installed pots was not properly connected to a ground due to that missing pad. So I reconnected it and did all of that, and bam, it worked. The X out and Y out voltages were now testing good, so what a relief. It was now time to move on to the monitor, the Wells Gardner 6100 color vector monitor. So I started to go through everything, inspecting everything. Initially, all I knew for certain was that the fuse F700 was blown. Half of the frame transistors tested bad. And although it seemed like some work had been done on the chassis before, no one had installed a LV2000 or made any of the recommended upgrades from the Vector FAQ guide. So I decided to give it the works. New caps, new transistors, new pots, fuses. I also installed an LV2000 light kit and all the recommended upgrades. I reflowed all the header pins and any cold solder that I could find. And I used an HV probe to precisely dial in the 19.5 kilovolts. Again, carefully following Andrew B's How to Bring Up a Color Vector 6100 monitor guide. And then I hooked it all up to the game PCB, and I was so close. The game was now in a playable state, and I probably could have lived with it the way it was at this point, but, no, it wasn't good enough. The monitor was displaying a series of crooked vectors, which were very obvious in test mode, but still also quite noticeable during gameplay, and it just bugged the heck out of me. I posted another question on the Claw forums, this time in the monitor section, and sure enough, Andrew B had seen this thing exactly before and knew exactly what to fix. It was a TL082 at DE11 on the game board. Again, I had already replaced that, but put a new one in, and I had socketed it the first time I replaced it, and 2 minutes later, I had it all straightened out. So after that, it was really just some cleanup, reassembly, some final tweaking. I used, to clean up the original control panel overlay, I used a magic eraser and some simple green, which really kind of spruced it up. The spinner and all the buttons functioned well. I bought sort of a new bushing to get rid of the whirring sound inside the spinner, which drives some people nuts. But to me, that's what Tempest is supposed to sound like. I had never played a Tempest that was perfect from the factory and didn't have that burr sound coming out of the spinner. The coin mechs needed a little bit of adjusting to work just right. And then at that point, everything came together real nicely. The last step was to install a pair of 120 volt fans to help cool the monitor, something I had, heard recommended, a couple different places, but I needed some way of powering them. A previous owner had installed an older 120 volt single fan by tapping directly into the original power cord, but I wanted a cleaner and less hacked up solution, so I wound up adding some spade connectors to the terminal block on the underside of the transformer assembly and wired up a new 3-pin Molex connector in the open slot on top of the transformer assembly next to the existing AC power harness connector. There was like a blank spot already there, so that made it really easy, and I could just plug right into that. And at that point, I added a new set of locks, and it was done, all done. Time to move this Tempest Cabaret down to the basement game room and look forward to the next project. That is, until inevitably Tempest stops working again, because Tempest is never fixed. It's only ever temporarily working. I still have some lingering jitter to sort out. That's been an issue, throughout. Andrew B's given me a couple different pointers on things to try, and maybe there's been some improvement. The next thing I'm going to do is probably replace that LV2000 kit again with a slightly, higher quality one. That's maybe the only thing left I haven't done, but, sometimes when I turn it on, it's really, really bad, and sometimes it's not there at all, so it is what it is. And I always worry about working on these things, to get them from 99% to 100, because, there's probably a greater risk that something goes wrong. Like one of my earliest videos on this channel, I was trying to work on that jitter, and, all of a sudden the game stopped working entirely and I couldn't figure it out. Turned out I had, I was reseating chips and I had put the main CPU in backwards. So, dumb mistake, kind of funny, but I'm glad that that's all it was. So I still have those jitters to contend with, but I'll probably live with them until it gets even worse. So I just want to say that I am truly very grateful to Andrew B and Vector Collector and everyone else who provided help on the Claw forums, as well as some really awesome retailers who sold me great replacement parts that all worked out well, including arcadepartsandrepair.com, Arcade Shop, Hot Rod Arcade, and Arcade Adventures. Thank you all. So yeah, I don't know if, I think I did okay in this tournament. I think I wound up getting second place, which is pretty good for me because, I'm not exactly an expert at restoring these games either, but I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to playing them. So getting second place in our little tournament is definitely a boon for me. So I certainly didn't best my, best high score ever, but it is what it is. I had fun. I hope you had fun too watching this video. If this is your first time, please click on that subscribe button. I release new videos like this every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes I do live streams. I've got a podcast. We do tons of, other kinds of cool stuff in this channel. We, most episodes are a little bit different. This is sort of a retrospective, and this is probably the last retrospective that we're going to do. This is the last major project that I have a lot of documentation for. Maybe I can try to find some stuff about the Donkey Kong Jr., but I don't know. So Robotron, Donkey Kong, and Tempest were really the three biggest restoration projects I did before starting this channel. Didn't do too much to the Play Choice 10. There are a couple of other games that only needed, some minor attention. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. We do much bigger, much longer restoration and repair series like for Joust and for Pango, and we're working on a Q*bert and a Ms. Pac-Man and all kinds of cool stuff. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that. If you like this episode, please, please, please hit that like button. It takes you 1 second. It really helps me out. It tells the YouTube algorithm to recommend this video to people like you, people who might enjoy it like you. If you know some people who might enjoy this video, feel free to share it with them. Send them the link, that sort of thing. Leave me a comment down below. Do you remember playing Tempest? Do you enjoy Tempest? Have you ever worked on a Tempest? What was that like? Was it as challenging as it was for you as it was for me? And if you really, really like what we're doing here, there's a couple ways for you to support the channel. You can become an Overtime Arcade channel member for just $1.99 a month. You get to support the channel. You get to access some really awesome perks like monthly members only live stream, a bonus private one that's not available to the public. You get early access to all new videos, typically on Saturday, the day before it gets released to the general public. And you also get access to our private members only Discord server, where we have a ton of fun talking about what we're working on, sharing deals, hooking each other up. And we have this tournament, this weekly tournament, like I've been talking about a little bit here. So if you want to learn more about what it means to become an Overtime Arcade channel member, click on that join button down below. If you don't want to sign up for a recurring payment, I totally get it. There's a super thanks button down there. Also looks like a $sign. You can make like a one-time donation. Again, really appreciate it. Totally unnecessary, but it's a great way to support the channel. I reinvest all that money back into projects and parts and things that I need. You know, I bought a new tripod recently, for example. And anyway, I actually bought a whole new computer, but we'll talk about that at another time. And yeah, you know, I also have a merchandise shop. I got some new designs coming out. I need to put some things in there, but people are buying stuff, you know, all the time from what's in there now. Anyway, I'm rambling. I think that's going to do it here. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching Overtime Arcade. I'm Charlie, and I'll see you next time.
Overtime!